I do say that most of the cryptid encounters that I have ever heard about seem to involve the woods, or driving, or being at least somewhere pretty far away from your own house. And I guess that is because most of these creatures live in places like the woods and hidden in caves to keep away from people. That is why they are such a mystery. My story is a bit different, because when I saw a cryptid, and I have no idea what exactly it was, it stood outside my very front door. Backtracking just a little, I live in a pretty rural area where you have to drive to your neighbor. It's not like I'm in an apartment block in New York or anything. We're surrounded by agriculture and farmland, so pretty huge fields and lots of trees. Plenty of places for something like my visitor to love without ever being seen. The kids had stayed really late in school for various practice, and my husband had driven into town to pick them up. He was going to take them out, so I had the place to myself for a bit. At the time, I was in the kitchen making lunch when I heard a sound outside. It sounded like a banging up against the front house. I thought that was unusual. It was dark, and too dark for anybody to be out there, at least unnoticed. My dog began growling. Not barking, just growling, which is odd, because usually, whenever there is somebody, he goes nuts. I yelled that I'm coming, assuming that it was somebody out front. Not really sure, or adding up in my mind that everything was too off. I did have a good sense to check the people before I opened the door, just to make sure there wasn't a masked gunman or anything. But when I looked out, no one. Nada. Nothing. There was nobody there. Now that was odd. The dog who would usually be at my feet, trying to sick whoever was there, was still in the kitchen, growling and whining, alternating between the two. Against my better judgment and my gut instinct, I opened the door. The porch light was on, but apart from that, it was practically pitch black. I don't know why, but instead of just closing the door and walking away, back to the safety of the kitchen, I heard myself calling out. There was rustling, and then this creature appeared. I don't think I was frightened immediately, more shocked, and also a notion of disbelief. The thing coming toward me was in no way human. My mind made that out pretty quickly, but it wasn't like any animal I have ever seen. It was grayish in color, and appeared to be covered in some thick, strange hair. It walked on two legs like a man, but its feet were cloven. It also had long, thin arms hanging by its side, longer than human arms would reach. Again, it had very bizarre-shaped hands. The face was even like a person, except it wasn't. The best way I can describe was kind of it like being Voldemort, you know, from Harry Potter. That sort of pseudo-human feature. Weird enough. It also had tiny wings that appeared to be on it. They were kind of scaly and tattered like a bat's. I stood there for a moment, almost expecting somebody to jump out with a video camera and shout, "You're pranked," or "Surprise." The dog started freaking out the second this thing came into view, suddenly remembering like it was meant to protect me, and began barking like mad. My visitor took one look and fled. It ran off. I'm not sure where it went. I'm not sure how long the dog kept barking. I stood there on the doorstep, terrified, mouth agape, wondering what just happened. What did I see? Trying to process what I just encountered. I don't know what that thing wanted, or why it chose to knock on the door. It sure looked strong enough to have ripped the door open, had it wanted to harm me. When I had looked at it, despite it being some sort of abomination, It did not appear threatening, although it did come and try to approach me. Again, if it had wanted to, I'm pretty sure it could have just eaten me or my dog. But it didn't give off a harmful aura. Of course, when my husband and kids came home, I told them. They're in high school. I wouldn't tell a kindergartner this stuff. They all thought I'd been drinking too much wine. Once I'd managed to finally convince them, they all went outside with lights and a gun, my husband insisting on taking the shotgun. But of course there were no signs or evidence. Oh, and for the record, I live out in rural Ohio, so I don't think this could have been a house call from the Jersey Devil. I'm hoping one of your listeners might have a suggestion, or you. By the way, I love your show a lot. I listen to it almost nightly, and I thought what a better way to contribute to your show than to tell you my own story. Thanks for reading. I run a pet walking service, and most of the time, especially when I have more than just a couple, I take them to the doggy park, or just somewhere where I can easily keep them on the leash, and I remain in control. But sometimes, if I have just one, I take them to these woods that is just a short drive from my town. There, they can roam around and sniff as many trees as they like, and most times, we don't usually see anybody else. Usually, I would only take a dog that I had previous experience with, so I knew what their behavior is like, and whether they might try to run off and jump straight into dirty, stagnant water. But I let my buddy convince me that his mother's dog was as good as gold, and so off I went. Almost to the woods, I let her off the leash, and she ran straight past the trees and towards the water. I'm a pretty good dog walker, not a good dog groomer. However, it is an unwritten rule that you don't return a dog covered in crap from a stagnant pond. I started calling her, but I could just hear her happy noises and splashing. So I made my way to the trees, knowing I'd now be transporting a stinky dog. The splashing noises were replaced with whining. I raced behind the tree line to the stink water, and saw her still in it, but frozen and staring, quivering at the trees behind the water. And then I saw why. Something was watching from just behind the trees. I could just about make out the shape of it in the shadows. It was fairly short, but bigger than any animal I could think of that would usually be roaming around. I'm guessing 5 feet. It also stood up on 2 legs, like a humanoid, a bipedal humanoid, which was scary. It was dark in color, but I couldn't tell if it had fur or just darker skin. The body seemed short, so it was mainly all legs, and then this large head, which kind of looked like it had antlers, but there was in no way any kind of deer. Its eyes were a shining yellow light. It was hard to tell whether it had arms, but if so, they must have been pointed to the front, like if a rabbit stands up, as I can't see them by its side like a person. The dog was still staring at it. Then, this thing, an alien, whatever you call it, made an awful noise, like a shriek. It actually hurt my ears, it was so high-pitched. Then, it turned and went back into the trees. That seemed to release the dog from whatever trance she was in, as she came racing back over. I put the leash on, and we got the hell out of there. Never have I returned there by myself or with dogs. I don't know what freaking alien I saw that day. One night, I was out with some buddies, and we were just driving around. When you live in a small town, there isn't much to do other than hang out with each other, visit coffee shops, and goof off. It was too cold to just hang out in one of the parking lots, or even outside 7-Eleven. So we hopped in the car, cranked on some music, and off we went. We just liked driving around. We didn't have much of a plan where to actually go. And of course, before long, we needed gas. There had been this rumor going around about a road towards the edge of town, where sometimes, supposedly, if you caught it just right, you could see the Hollow Man. Apparently, he'd been dubbed that as he was real tall, but super skinny too, like as if he was hollow on the inside. Then, there was all sorts of BS floating about, with rules as to when and how you could see him. Like it had to be a full moon, or you had to be a virgin, or, according to one of the football players, you had to like partying and hooking up. But I think that was only him. We were pretty close to the road now, so it seemed like the perfect idea to go and park. We'd still get to hang out. We'd been saving gas, and we might have seen a chance on seeing this thing. There were 4 of us in the car at the time, all us guys, and none of us remotely believed for one moment that there really was somebody who appeared in the road. After all, I was convinced it was total BS, and no doubt actually made up by one of the jocks probably to impress girls. So, we sat there, listening to some metal. My phone was still playing some classic Guns N' Roses, as we all just sat there. No one daring for a minute or two to move, or say anything. He'd come out of nowhere, but now, there, he was catching the full beam of headlights. He was indeed really tall, if I had to guess. He was also not just skinny, but skeletal in nature, like he was literally just made of bones with skin stretched over it. His arm and legs were like sticks, nearly bones, and he was very pale and gray, and nearly white. His head was tiny, large empty eyes, and a small tiny mouth. I was in the back seat, as my buddy was driving. He suddenly tried to whip his phone and snap a picture. Whether it was the sudden movement or the flash, I don't know. But he, or it, whatever it was, ran back into the trees from where he must have come from. We all just sat there, and Ryan did happen to snap a photo, but of course, due to the motion and the lighting, it was blurry. So, we all knew what we saw as the Hollow Man. Well, after doing a little bit of research on Google, turns out that the descriptions of what we saw actually point us to the crawler, meaning that this thing was either the rake or a crawler, which I guess have been reported all throughout America. Pretty eerie to know that we've saw something that many don't believe exist, while many others report seeing in their home states too. That's my encounter story.